There's this moment in the very first episode of The Walking Dead Season 1, Days Gone By, that I keep coming back to. Rick Grimes stumbles out of his hospital bed, confused and alone, and he makes his way to the bathroom. He turns the faucet. Nothing. Not a drop. It's such a small thing, right? Just a man looking for water in an empty hospital. But that dry tap is the first sign that the world he knew is gone. Clean water, hot showers, the luxury of washing your hands whenever you wanted all of it, vanished. And here's the question that's been haunting me ever since. When did survival stop including cleanliness? When did staying human stop meaning staying clean? Let's trace this quiet collapse together. Back in Season 3, when Rick and the group first found the prison, there was something almost hopeful about it. I mean, yes, it was prison walkers in the corridors, bodies everywhere, that whole nightmare. But once they cleared it out, you could see them trying to build something that felt like life again. And if you watch those early prison episodes carefully, starting around Seed in Season 3, Episode 1, you'll notice something in the background. The infrastructure was still there. Showers, plumbing, running water from the well they maintained in the courtyard. Herschel understood this better than anyone. He wasn't just the group's moral compass. He was their reminder that survival meant more than just not dying. It meant maintaining routines, preserving dignity, holding on to the parts of themselves that made them human. You'd see him insisting on meal times together, on keeping the cells clean, on basic sanitation. It wasn't about being precious or naive. Herschel had already lost his farm, his wife, eventually his leg by the end of Season 3. He knew what the world had become. He'd put down walkers in his own barn. He'd seen his daughters nearly die multiple times. But he also knew that the moment you stop trying to live like a person is the moment you're already gone. The prison era, roughly Seasons 3 and 4, represents what I think of as peak hygiene in the Walking Dead universe. They had systems. They had routines. They weren't just surviving. They were attempting something close to normal life. You could see people working on maintaining the infrastructure, checking the well, making sure the water stayed clean, organizing supply runs for soap and basic necessities. It wasn't perfect, but it was intentional. And that intention, that's what civilization looks like in the apocalypse. The choice to care about cleanliness, even when every day is a fight to stay alive. Think about what the prison represented. It was the first real home they'd had since the CDC exploded back in Season 1. The farm had been temporary, always Herschel's place that they were just visiting. But the prison? They cleared it themselves. They fought for it. They made it theirs. And part of making it theirs meant establishing the rhythms of normal life. Morning watch rotations, yes, but also communal meals, garden plots, baby formula for Judith, and yes, basic hygiene routines. Here's what strikes me about those prison days. Cleanliness became a marker of hope. When things were stable, when they had a moment to breathe, people washed. They cleaned their clothes in buckets. They maintained their space. The cells were organized, personal items carefully arranged. But the moment danger came, and it always came, whether it was the governor's attacks or the walker swarms or the illness that nearly destroyed them from within, in Season 4, hygiene was the first thing to go. Priorities shifted instantly. Defense, food, weapons, escape routes, medical supplies for the flu outbreak, quarantine protocols. A shower? That could wait. Except it kept waiting and waiting until eventually, I think they stopped expecting it at all. There's this scene in Season 4 during the flu outbreak where everyone's focused on survival. People are dying in the cells, the illness is spreading, and Herschel is moving between patients trying to keep them alive with elderberry tea and whatever medical knowledge he has. Nobody's thinking about washing. They're thinking about breathing, about making it through the night. That's when you see the shift, when hygiene stops being a priority and becomes a luxury they can't afford. So here's my question for you. If you were in their shoes, fortified in a prison with walkers at the gates and the governor circling outside, what would you prioritize? First, safety or cleanliness? Would you waste precious water on a shower when that same water might be needed for drinking tomorrow? When people are sick and dying, and you need every drop for medical care? It's one of those impossible choices that the apocalypse forces on people, and the answer tells you something about who they're becoming. The prison era was the last time they had the luxury of choosing both. After the prison fell, after the governor's tank rolled through those fences and everything they'd built collapsed in fire and blood, that choice went away. They were back on the road, back to pure survival, and hygiene became something they remembered from before, not something they could maintain. The moment everything changed, really changed for me, was Terminus. Season 5, Episode 1. No Sanctuary. Our group arrives at this place that's promised safety, community, a chance to finally stop running. They'd seen the signs for miles. Sanctuary for all, community for all. Those who arrive survive. It sounded too good to be true, and of course, it was. Instead of sanctuary, they found themselves herded like cattle, stripped of their weapons, their agency, their humanity. There's this scene where they're being processed, lined up at a trough, and the dehumanization is so deliberate. They're not being treated like people anymore. They're resources, meat for the grills that Terminus uses to feed its residents. And here's what's fascinating about Terminus from a hygiene perspective. The people running it were clean, spotless, even. Gareth and his people had pristine clothes, washed faces, an almost eerie sense of normalcy about their appearance. Their space was organized, maintained, deliberately civilized looking. Meanwhile, Rick and the group were covered in road dirt, blood, the accumulated grime of weeks on the run after the prison fell. They looked like exactly what they were. Desperate survivors who'd been fighting for their lives every single day. The contrast wasn't accidental. It was a visual representation of power. The people who controlled the water, the food, the resources they got to stay clean. Everyone else, they got to survive if they were lucky, or end up on the grill if they weren't. Terminus showed us that in the apocalypse, cleanliness isn't just about hygiene, it's about dominance. It's about showing the people you're about to kill that you're civilized and they're not, that you're in control and they're just meat. When Aaron shows up later in Season 5, in Episode 10, Them, and continuing into Episode 11, The Distance, to recruit them to Alexandria, one of the first things he mentions is that they have running water, hot showers. It sounds like fantasy, like he's describing a place that can't possibly exist anymore. And you can see the disbelief on their faces. Michonne, Carol, Daryl, they've been on the road so long that the idea of a hot shower feels like a lie, a trap. Because in their experience, every time someone promised them something good, it turned into a nightmare. Terminus promised sanctuary and gave them slaughter. The governor promised community and brought war. Why would Alexandria be any different? This is where the class divide in The Walking Dead becomes visible through hygiene. Road survivors look like what they are. People who've been fighting for their lives every single day. They're filthy because they have to be. There's no time, no water, no safety to do anything about it. When you're moving constantly, when every building might have walkers, When every moment of vulnerability could get you killed, washing becomes impossible. You drink the water you find. You keep moving. You stay alive. That's it. But the people in established communities, whether it's the false promise of Terminus or the real haven of Alexandria, they have the luxury of cleanliness. And that luxury is built on resources, security, and systems that the road survivors simply don't have access to. They have walls, they have guards, they have the safety to stop and wash without worrying that they'll be attacked while vulnerable. That's privilege in the apocalypse. That's what power looks like. The emotional stake here cuts deep. Cleanliness represents humanity. It's one of those basic markers of civilization that we take for granted until it's gone. We shower every day without thinking about it. We wash our hands after using the bathroom. We change our clothes. All of it, automatic, unconscious, just part of being a person. But in the apocalypse, it becomes a question of pragmatism versus identity. Do you waste precious resources on staying clean when those same resources could keep you alive? And if you stop caring about hygiene entirely, are you losing something essential about who you are? The group grappling with this question, sometimes consciously, sometimes not, is one of the quieter threads running through the show. You see it in how they react to Alexandria. They're suspicious of the cleanliness. It feels wrong, like these people don't understand what the world really is. And maybe they're right. Maybe Alexandria's residents were sheltered, protected from the worst of it. But maybe the group had also lost something important on the road. Maybe they'd forgotten that being human means more than just surviving. What Terminus teaches us is that hygiene reveals power dynamics. The ones who stay clean are the ones in control. And that's a pattern we'll see again and again as the show progresses. Season 5, Episode 12. Remember, Rick stands in a bathroom in Alexandria, staring at himself in the mirror. There's a shower behind him, running water, soap, shampoo, razors. All the things that used to be normal and now feel like relics from another world. He turns on the water. It's hot. Steam rises and fills the small bathroom, fogging the mirror. And you can see something break in him, not in a bad way, but in a way that lets him feel, just for a moment, like a person again, instead of a survival machine. But here's what makes that scene so powerful and so tragic at the same time. Rick can't fully relax into it. Even as he's washing away months of dirt and blood and trauma, he's tense, vigilant. His eyes keep moving to the door, checking, making sure nobody's coming. Because he's learned that comfort is dangerous. The moment you let your guard down is the moment something goes wrong. He scrubs himself clean, watches the water run brown with accumulated grime, but the paranoia doesn't wash off. That stays. That's permanent now. The shower scene is intercut with Deanna interviewing him, asking him questions about his past, about his leadership, about what the group has been through. And Rick's giving her the sanitized version, the one that makes him sound reasonable and normal. But we know what he's really thinking. We saw him tell the group in the previous episode that if Alexandria doesn't work out, they'll just take it. He's already planning for violence while pretending to be grateful for hospitality. The hot water can't wash away that mindset, can't wash away what survival has turned him into. And later, when Deanna throws her little wine parties while there are walkers rotting just outside the walls, the disconnect becomes even clearer. The Alexandrians are playing at civilization. They're maintaining the appearance of normalcy. Dinner parties, movie nights, jobs with titles that don't mean anything anymore. They've preserved the structure of the old world without understanding that the foundation has crumbled. They're clean and comfortable and utterly unprepared for what's really out there. Alexandria was supposed to be different. A real community with real infrastructure, solar panels keeping the power running, a functional water system with filtration and pressure, houses with bathrooms and kitchens, and all the trappings of the old world. Diana and her people had managed to preserve something that looked like civilization, but they'd also preserved something else: denial. They were so focused on maintaining the appearance of normalcy that they'd forgotten what survival actually required. They had a system for trash collection, but barely adequate defenses. They worried about job assignments while walkers pressed against their walls. You see it in Carol's transformation. She shows up looking like she's been through hell because she has, and within days, she's reinvented herself. Clean clothes she found in one of the empty houses, hair washed and styled. This whole domestic persona that makes her look harmless, non-threatening, just a nice lady who might bake you cookies, and it works. The Alexandrians see her as one of them, someone who fits into their neat, clean world. They don't see the warrior who burned Terminus to the ground. They don't see the woman who's hidden weapons in multiple locations around Alexandria. They don't see someone who's already planning escape routes and worst-case scenarios. Meanwhile, she's hiding weapons in the pantry and planning contingencies because she knows that cleanliness and safety aren't the same thing. Sometimes looking clean is just another kind of camouflage. Sometimes fitting in is the best way to prepare for when everything falls apart. And it will fall apart. It always does. The showrunners use hygiene throughout the Alexandria arc to show us who's adapting and who's clinging to the old world. The longer Rick's group stays there, the cleaner they get, not because they suddenly care more about showers, but because they're surrounded by a system that makes it possible. Daryl initially resists it. He shows up to Deanna's party in his road clothes, dirty and uncomfortable, because he doesn't trust this place yet. But gradually, even he starts to integrate. Starts to believe that maybe, just maybe, Alexandria could work. But that system is fragile. It depends on walls staying up, generators running, wells staying clean, solar panels continuing to function. And in The Walking Dead, nothing stays stable for long. The walkers are always out there. The living threats, whether it's the wolves or the saviors or something worse, are always coming. Alexandria's cleanliness is built on borrowed time and luck that can't possibly hold. So here's the question Alexandria forces us to confront. How long could a place like that last? Not just in terms of walls and defenses, but in terms of maintaining the infrastructure that makes cleanliness possible. Because the luxury of a hot shower isn't just about water. It's about security, time, energy, resources, all the things the apocalypse is designed to strip away, and eventually it does. Let's talk about something the show rarely addresses directly but demonstrates constantly: the water crisis. From the moment the outbreak began, municipal water systems failed. No power meant no pumps. No pumps meant no running water to houses and buildings. Every tap in every city went dry within days, maybe hours. And that means every community that survived the initial outbreak had to solve one fundamental problem. Where do we get water, and how do we keep it clean enough to drink? This isn't a small problem. A human can survive weeks without food, but only days without water. 3 days, maybe 4 if you're lucky and it's not too hot. After that, dehydration kills you. Your organs shut down, your brain swells, and you die. So water isn't just a convenience. It's not a luxury. It's the most fundamental survival necessity there is. Before food, before shelter, Before weapons, you need water. Hilltop, which we first see in Season 6, Episode 11, Knots Untie, had a solution. Wells. Deep wells. Manually operated. Maintained by people who understood that water was life. You can see it in background shots throughout Seasons 6, 7, 8, and 9. Someone's always working the well, checking the mechanism, making sure the water stays clean and accessible. It's unglamorous work. The kind of thing that doesn't make for dramatic television, but it's absolutely essential. Without those wells, Hilltop dies. Simple as that. Everyone there knows it. That's why Jesus made sure the wells were protected, why Maggie prioritized their maintenance when she became leader, why even during sieges and conflicts, someone was always assigned to guard the water supply. Wells require knowledge to maintain. You can't just dig a hole and hope for the best. You need to understand water tables, aquifers, contamination risks. You need to know how to prevent collapse, how to check for bacteria, how to keep animals and walkers from falling in and poisoning the supply. Hilltop had people with that knowledge, probably farmers and agricultural workers from before the outbreak who understood well systems. That institutional knowledge kept them alive. Oceanside, introduced in Season 7, Episode 6, Swear, had a different advantage: proximity to the coast. They're right there on the water, which gives them access to fish as a protein source, salt for preservation, and if they can manage it, desalination for drinking water. It's not easy. Turning ocean water into drinking water requires either boiling, which takes fuel you might not have, or some kind of filtration system that requires maintenance and technical knowledge. But the point is, they have options. They're not dependent on a single well that could run dry or get contaminated. They have the entire Atlantic Ocean as a backup resource. The coastal location also gives Oceanside strategic advantages. They can fish. They can gather shellfish from tidal pools. They have salt for preserving food. And importantly, they're isolated, hidden away, where random groups of survivors or hostile communities won't stumble across them. That isolation, combined with water security, let them survive when larger, more visible communities fell. And then there's Alexandria, which we see starting in Season 5, built near a lake and a river system. That's not an accident. Whoever originally planned Alexandria as a safe zone knew that water access would be critical. You can't sustain a community of any size without a reliable water source. 50 people, 100 people, they need gallons of water every single day just for drinking, before you even think about cooking, washing, sanitation, or agriculture. And you certainly can't maintain hygiene showers, laundry, basic sanitation without abundant water. Alexandria's infrastructure was designed around that water access. They had systems to pull water from the lake, filter it, distribute it to the houses. That's why they could maintain running water when most of the world couldn't. That's why hot showers were possible. It wasn't magic. It was infrastructure and location. Here's the pattern that emerges when you look at all the successful communities in The Walking Dead. They all prosper near water sources, and they all fail without them. It's one of those fundamental truths that the show demonstrates but rarely explains outright. The prison had wells in the courtyard. Alexandria had a lake and river access. Hilltop had deep wells. Oceanside had the ocean. Even the sanctuary, for all its flaws and brutality under Negan's rule, must have had some kind of water infrastructure to support the population we saw there. Water is the foundation. Everything else, food security, defense, governance, trade, builds on top of that. But here's what's interesting. The show doesn't romanticize this. Having water doesn't make a place safe. It doesn't prevent conflict or guarantee survival. What it does is make certain things possible, like washing, like cleaning wounds properly, instead of hoping infection doesn't set in, like maintaining some small piece of the dignity that comes with not being covered in filth every single day. The communities that understood this priority water first, everything else second, had a chance at building something lasting. The ones that didn't, they're gone now, forgotten. Just more ruins scattered across the landscape of the fallen world. The Whisperers changed everything. When Alpha and her people first appeared in Season 9, they weren't just another threat like the Saviors or the Terminus cannibals. They were a complete rejection of everything the communities had been trying to build. No walls, no structures, no governance or hierarchy beyond Alpha's brutal dominance. No technology. And critically, deliberately, no hygiene. They cover themselves in walker skin, walker blood, the rot and decay of the dead. They smelled like corpses because they chose to. It was philosophy made flesh. This wasn't about lacking access to water or soap. The Whisperers moved through territories where streams and rivers flowed. They could have washed if they wanted to, but they didn't want to. Alpha believed that the old world's obsession with cleanliness, with civilization, with maintaining appearances, all of it was weakness, a distraction from the fundamental truth of survival. In her worldview, the people who clung to showers and clean clothes and the remnants of the old world were the ones who'd get themselves killed. They were soft, unprepared, still living in a fantasy that didn't exist anymore. And there's something genuinely unsettling about that philosophy, isn't there? Because on some level, she's not entirely wrong. Every resource spent on staying clean is a resource not spent on staying alive. Every moment you spend washing is a moment you're vulnerable, distracted, not watching for threats. The Whisperers took that logic to its extreme conclusion and decided that hygiene itself was a luxury they couldn't afford. More than that, they decided it was a weakness to be exploited in others. By wearing the dead, by smelling like corpses, they could move among walker herds undetected. That was their tactical advantage. Walkers identify prey by sight and smell. Make yourself look and smell like them, and they ignore you. It's horrifying. It's psychologically devastating to the people doing it. But tactically, it works. The Whisperers could control walker herds, direct them, use them as weapons against communities with walls and defenses, all because they were willing to abandon hygiene entirely. But here's where it gets interesting. Lydia, Alpha's daughter, played by Cassidy McClincy starting in Season 9, Episode 6, Who Are You Now? She grows up in this world where filth is normal, where cleanliness is seen as weakness, where even basic sanitation is rejected as a relic of the old world. Her mother beat the old world out of her, literally, scarred her to teach her strength, made her watch people die to teach her that caring about others was vulnerability. And then Lydia encounters the communities. She's captured, brought to Hilltop, and she sees people who still wash, who still care about being clean, who haven't given up that piece of their humanity. She sees Enid treating patients in a clinic. She sees people growing food in gardens. She sees children playing, protected by adults who care about their safety. And gradually, over multiple episodes, she makes a choice. She integrates with Hilltop. She chooses a different path than her mother's. That choice is symbolic of something much larger than just personal preference. It's not just about whether or not to take a shower. It's about what kind of world you're willing to accept. The Whisperers represent complete surrender to the apocalypse, becoming so much like the Walkers that you're barely distinguishable from them, living like animals, discarding everything that made you human because humanity is seen as fatal weakness. But the communities, flawed as they are, represent resistance. They're saying, no, we're still human, we're still people, and people wash. People care about each other. People build things and grow things and try to create something better than just survival. It's harder. It requires more resources, more effort, more emotional vulnerability, but they've decided it's worth it. Season 10 pushes this contrast even further during the Whisperer War. The conflict between the communities and the Whisperers isn't just about territory or resources. It's about two fundamentally different answers to the question, what does it mean to survive? Do you adapt until you're unrecognizable? Do you discard your humanity piece by piece until there's nothing left but survival instinct? Or do you fight to preserve the things that make you who you are, even if it's harder, even if it's dangerous, even if it costs you? Alpha's death in Season 10, Episode 12, Walk With Us, killed by Negan after Carol manipulates him into it, represents the defeat of her philosophy. Not because cleanliness won or civilization prevailed, but because her absolute rejection of humanity made her vulnerable in ways she didn't anticipate. She couldn't trust anyone because she'd created a world where trust was weakness. And that isolation killed her. So here's my question for you. Is staying clean worth the risk? Is maintaining that connection to the old world, to the idea that cleanliness matters, that hygiene is part of being human, worth the resources it costs? Or is that just nostalgia for a world that's gone and isn't coming back? The Whisperers said no. Lydia, gradually and painfully, said yes. And that difference, that's what the whole conflict was really about. Not Walker masks or border disputes. It was about whether humanity was worth preserving or whether survival meant abandoning it entirely. By the time we reach the Commonwealth in Season 11, hygiene has become something else entirely. A class system made visible. You can tell someone's social status in the Commonwealth at a glance, just by looking at how clean they are. Pamela Milton and the upper class? Immaculate. Pressed clothes that look like they came from a dry cleaner that somehow still exists. Styled hair, clean fingernails, makeup even. They look like they stepped out of the old world unchanged, like the apocalypse happened to other people but not to them. Meanwhile, the workers, the people actually doing the labor that keeps the Commonwealth running, cleaning the streets and hauling supplies and working the farms, they're covered in sweat and dirt and the grime of hard work. Their clothes are worn, practical, stained. They wash, probably, but not with the frequency or quality that the upper class enjoys. The difference is stark, intentional, and deeply revealing about what the Commonwealth really is. This isn't accidental. This is designed. The Commonwealth has the resources to keep everyone clean. They're a community of 50,000 people with functional infrastructure, water treatment systems, soap production, laundry facilities. They have the capability, but those resources are distributed unequally, deliberately so. The people at the top get hot showers and fresh clothes daily. The people at the bottom get what's left over, rationed access to facilities on their days off if they're lucky. And that disparity is intentional because it reinforces the hierarchy. It makes the class differences visible, undeniable. You can see at a glance who matters and who doesn't in the Commonwealth's social structure. Pamela Milton walks through the streets pristine and untouched, while workers step aside, dirty and deferential. It's a visual representation of power that doesn't require words or explanations. Everyone understands immediately where they stand. Eugene's arc in the Commonwealth is fascinating from this perspective. When he first arrives with Stephanie in Season 11, Episode 8, for Blood, he's road dirty, disheveled, clearly someone from outside. He's got his mullet and his worn clothes, and he looks like exactly what he is, a survivor who's been fighting for years. But as he gets integrated into Commonwealth society, as they evaluate him and decide he has value as a teacher, he gets cleaned up. New clothes, a haircut that makes him look more professional, access to regular showers and grooming supplies. It's presented as assimilation, as becoming part of something bigger and better. Look, the Commonwealth seems to say, you can have this too. You can be clean and comfortable and safe. All you have to do is accept your place in our system. And for a while, Eugene accepts it. He's grateful. He teaches classes, dates Stephanie, starts to believe that maybe the Commonwealth is the future. But it's also a kind of control. They're literally washing away his identity as a survivor and replacing it with the identity they want him to have. A Commonwealth citizen, useful, compliant, fitting neatly into their designated slot. The clean clothes aren't just about hygiene. They're about conformity, about erasing where he came from and who he was before. The show uses hygiene as a visual class indicator throughout the Commonwealth arc, and once you notice it, you can't unsee it. Background extras in the worker districts are consistently dirty, not because they don't have access to water, but because they don't have access to the time, the energy, or the quality of facilities that the upper class enjoys. Their cleanliness is rationed, controlled, used as another way to keep them in their place. Watch the scenes in the Commonwealth bakery where Ezekiel works in Season 11. The workers there are flour-dusted, sweaty, working long shifts in hot conditions. Meanwhile, Pamela Milton hosts a gala where everyone's in formal wear, looking like they're at a pre-apocalypse high society event. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Same community, same resources theoretically available, but completely different lived realities. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. The Commonwealth isn't wrong to prioritize hygiene, clean water, sanitation systems, proper waste management. These things prevent disease. They keep people healthy. A community that size, 50,000 people, can't survive without them. Cholera, dysentery, typhoid, all the diseases that come from poor sanitation would rip through the population in weeks without proper systems. But the Commonwealth has weaponized those necessities. They've turned basic human dignity into a reward for compliance, a privilege that can be granted or withheld based on your usefulness to the system. Play by their rules, accept your assigned job and social status, and you get access to regular showers and clean clothes. Cause problems, question the hierarchy, and maybe your water ration gets reduced. Maybe your shower access becomes limited. They don't have to say it explicitly. The threat is built into the structure. This is the furthest evolution of the pattern we've been tracking. Hygiene as power. Back at Terminus, the people in charge were clean because they controlled the resources. In Alexandria, everyone had access to showers because the system was designed to preserve pre-apocalypse normalcy for everyone. But in the Commonwealth, hygiene has become a tool of social control. The ones at the top stay clean to maintain the illusion of civilization, to prove their superiority. The ones at the bottom stay dirty to remind them of their place. And the show lets us see both sides of that. The workers who resent the inequality. The upper class who genuinely believe they've built something worth preserving. Neither side is entirely wrong. Neither side is entirely right. It's just another impossible situation in a world built on them. Let's step outside the main show for a moment and look at how the other series in the Walking Dead universe handle this same question. Because what's fascinating is that every show develops its own hygiene logic based on its setting and circumstances. And those differences tell us something important about how survival looks in different contexts. Fear the Walking Dead, especially in its early seasons, gave us Strand's yacht, the Abigail. And think about what that meant in Season 1 and early Season 2. A mobile community with access to the ocean, to fish, to the ability to travel up and down the coast looking for supplies. But more than that, a boat with a shower, running water from desalination systems, the luxury of washing with fresh water while surrounded by salt water. For a brief moment, Strand's group had something most survivors could only dream about: reliable access to cleanliness while staying mobile and relatively safe. Victor Strand himself, played by Coleman Domingo, understood the psychological value of that. He maintained his appearance even as the world fell apart. Nice clothes, groomed, presenting himself as someone in control even when everything was chaos. For him, appearance was power. Looking clean and composed was how you maintained authority, how you convinced people to follow you. The yacht wasn't just transportation. It was a symbol of his ability to preserve civilization's trappings. Then there's the hotel arc in Fear the Walking Dead Seasons 2 and 3, a beachside resort with its own water systems, its own infrastructure. The people who took control of that hotel initially, the mother and daughter who'd been surviving there, then the extended group understood immediately what they had. Not just shelter, but the means to maintain some version of civilized life. Showers, laundry, clean sheets, swimming pool water that could be filtered and used. All the things that signal normalcy in a world that's anything but normal. But here's the pattern we see in Fear. These advantages were temporary. The yacht got abandoned when circumstances changed. The hotel eventually fell to walkers and conflict, because in the Walking Dead universe, no infrastructure lasts forever. Systems break down. Resources run out. And the communities built on those systems collapse with them. It doesn't matter how good your setup is. Initially, entropy wins eventually. Now contrast that with Dead City, which takes place in Manhattan years after the outbreak. Urban water scarcity in a city that size presents a completely different challenge. The municipal water system is long dead. The skyscrapers that defined the skyline are empty shells. Any standing water is probably contaminated with walker rot, chemicals from abandoned buildings, who knows what else. The survivors there aren't thinking about showers. They're thinking about finding any clean water at all, just to drink. Manhattan's infrastructure was built on complexity: pumping stations, treatment facilities, underground pipes carrying water from upstate reservoirs. All of that requires power, maintenance, technical knowledge. Without it, the whole system fails. So survivors in Dead City are probably collecting rainwater, melting snow in winter, boiling water from the rivers if they're desperate. The standard has dropped so far that basic hydration is the goal, never mind hygiene. What these shows reveal is that water access equals power across the entire franchise. Strand controlled the yacht, he controlled the group. The people who held the hotel controlled that resource and the relative safety it provided. And in Dead City, whoever controls the clean water sources, assuming any exist, controls who lives and who dies. It's the same pattern playing out in different settings, different contexts, but always with the same fundamental truth. In the apocalypse, water is everything. The Daryl Dixon spin-off, which takes Daryl to France in a setting we're still learning about, will likely show us yet another variation. European infrastructure was different from American. The collapse would have looked different. And that means the survivors' relationship to things like water and hygiene might be different too. Maybe they maintained better systems. Maybe they lost them faster. Either way, it'll be interesting to see how a different setting changes the equation. And this brings us back to the core theory. Hygiene isn't just about cleanliness. It's about control, class, power, and what version of humanity a community chooses to maintain. Fear showed us communities that tried to preserve old-world standards. Strand's insistence on maintaining appearance, the hotel's temporary preservation of resort amenities. Dead City shows us what happens when those standards become impossible urban survivors fighting for basic drinking water. And the main show documents the slow decline from one to the other. The cross-show pattern is clear when you look at it comprehensively. Communities rise and fall based on their ability to maintain basic resources. Water first, food security second, defense third. Everything else, including the luxury of washing, of maintaining hygiene, of preserving that piece of pre-apocalypse normalcy, comes after those fundamentals are secured. And when those resources fail, when the water runs out or gets contaminated or becomes too dangerous to access, the community fails with them. What's interesting is that each show uses hygiene to mark progress or decline. When characters have access to showers, we know they've found temporary stability. When they're covered in grime and struggling to find drinking water, we know things have gotten desperate. It's visual shorthand that works across a franchise, a way to communicate survival status without needing exposition or explanation. The viewer understands intuitively. Clean means safe, at least for now. Dirty means danger. And the transitions between those states mark the rise and fall of communities, the success or failure of survival strategies, the preservation or loss of humanity itself. Here's where we start building the theory more explicitly. I think hygiene maintenance declined significantly after Season 6, and it wasn't just a production choice or budget consideration. It was a narrative one, a deliberate decision by the showrunners to reflect the psychological reality of long-term survival. Let me show you what I mean. In the early seasons 1 through 4, roughly, you'd occasionally see characters washing, cleaning clothes in buckets, maintaining basic sanitation. It wasn't a focus of the narrative, but it was present in background details that suggested people were still trying to preserve normalcy. Carol doing laundry at the prison. People using the showers when they existed. Small moments that showed they hadn't given up on being clean. But somewhere around Season 6, after the group has dealt with the saviors, after they've lost Glenn and Abraham and so many others, after they've fought and killed and survived things that should have broken them, those details start disappearing. People get dirtier, hair gets longer and unkempt. The visible grime accumulates and stays. Rick's beard grows thick and wild. Daryl's hair gets longer, greasier. Even Michonne, who'd maintained her appearance relatively well in earlier seasons, starts looking more worn, less polished. Now, part of this is obviously practical. From a production standpoint, constantly showing people bathing isn't interesting television. It slows down the narrative pace. You've got 45 minutes per episode to tell a story about survival, conflict, character development. Why spend screen time on someone washing dishes or taking a shower unless it serves a larger narrative purpose? And from an actor's perspective, there are limits to how much dirt and makeup you can reasonably maintain day after day of filming. The makeup department can only do so much to keep continuity consistent while keeping actors comfortable during long shoot days. I get that. I understand the practical considerations. But I think there's something more deliberate happening here too. Something the showrunners chose to emphasize as the series progressed. The decision to let cleanliness fade as a priority reflects the psychological reality of long-term survival. In the beginning, when the apocalypse was new, Season 1, Season 2, people still had the emotional energy to care about things like washing. They were still operating under the assumption that this was temporary, that civilization would come back, that maintaining certain standards mattered because normal life would eventually resume. Remember in Season 1 how the Atlanta camp maintained certain routines? Women washing clothes in the quarry, people taking time to clean themselves when they could. It wasn't just about hygiene, it was about hope. But after years of loss, after Alexandria and the Saviors and the Whisperers and everything else they've endured, that emotional energy is gone. Think about everything they've been through by Season 6. The farm fell. The prison fell. Terminus tried to eat them. They lost Beth at the hospital. They lost Tyrese. They watched Alexandria nearly collapse from internal threats and external ones. They faced Negan and lost 2 of their own in brutal, public executions meant to break their spirits. That kind of accumulated trauma doesn't just disappear. It weighs on you, changes you, makes you stop caring about things that once seemed important. Think about what washing represents on a psychological level. It's an act of hope. It's saying, I care about tomorrow enough to clean myself today. It's maintaining dignity in a world designed to strip it away. It's holding on to the person you were before, believing that person still matters. But hope is exhausting. Caring is exhausting. And at some point, after enough trauma, enough loss, enough desperate fights for survival, people stop having the energy for it. Rick's beard growth is a perfect example of this psychological decline. In the early seasons, he stayed relatively clean-shaven. Not perfectly groomed, this is the apocalypse, after all, but maintained. It was part of his identity as a leader, a former sheriff's deputy, someone who maintained standards even when the world fell apart. The beard represented control, discipline, holding on to who he was. But as the seasons progress and the weight of leadership crushes down on him, the beard grows. Season 4, it starts appearing. By Season 5, it's established. Season 7 and 8, it's thick and wild. He stops caring about that kind of appearance. It's not that he can't find a razor. Alexandria has them. The hilltop probably has them. It's that shaving doesn't matter anymore. The things that matter are keeping people alive, making impossible decisions, carrying the burden of leadership that's breaking him slowly. Whether or not he looks presentable, that's so far down the priority list it doesn't even register. The same pattern appears with other characters. Maggie's appearance after Glenn's death in Season 7, she's harder, less concerned with anything cosmetic, focused entirely on survival and eventually vengeance. Carol cycles through phases where she maintains appearance for strategic reasons, but increasingly looks worn, tired, done. Eva Michonne, who maintained her appearance relatively well, becomes less polished as the weight of leadership and loss accumulates. The question isn't, Why don't they shower more often? The real question is, when did they stop trying? When did the apocalypse finally break that last connection to the old world where cleanliness was normal, expected, automatic, and what does it mean that they've let it go? Here's a pattern I've noticed watching the show multiple times. The fewer bathing and cleaning scenes we see, the harder the times being portrayed. It's like a visual shorthand the show uses to communicate stress, danger, and desperation without having to explicitly state it through dialogue. And from season 10 onward, especially during the Whisperer War and its aftermath, those scenes become increasingly rare to the point of non-existent. Think about the Whisperer War that dominates season 9 and 10, the constant movement between communities, the fear of walker herds being weaponized and directed at settlements, the loss of multiple communities the kingdom falls, people have to evacuate. The coalition between Alexandria, Hilltop, and Oceanside is stretched thin. Resources are scarce. Trust is fractured. There's no time for washing. There's barely time for sleep. The characters are running on adrenaline, grief, and whatever stubborn will to survive keeps them moving forward when logic says they should give up. And their appearance reflects that. They look exhausted, worn down, dirty in a way that goes beyond just physical grime. They look like people who've been ground down by circumstances beyond their control. Daryl looks rougher than ever, hair long and unkempt. Carol's face shows every loss, every burden. Michonne carries the weight of leadership visibly. Even the younger characters, like Judith and RJ, exist in a world where cleanliness is clearly not a priority. By season 11, during the Commonwealth arc, we get that stark contrast again. The Commonwealth's upper class is immaculately clean, while workers are visibly dirty. But our main characters, when they first arrive, are road-worn and grimy. They've been surviving outside the walls for so long that cleanliness seems almost foreign to them. And then there's the Daryl Dixon spin-off, which takes him to France. Different country, different infrastructure, different water systems. I think what's going to be fascinating about future spin-offs is watching how they handle this question in new contexts. Because France, after the apocalypse, isn't going to have the same resources or challenges as Virginia or Georgia. The infrastructure was different to begin with. More reliance on nuclear power, different water treatment systems, different population density. The collapse would have looked different. And that means the survivor's relationship to things like hygiene might be different too. My theory is that future spin-offs will use hygiene as a luxury marker, a way to show flashbacks to better times, or to indicate when characters have found temporary safety. A shower scene won't just be about getting clean. It'll be a signal to the audience that, for this moment at least, these people are safe enough to care about something other than immediate survival. It'll be a visual representation of hope returning, even temporarily. We've already seen hints of this in how different spin-offs handle it. The ones that show more stable communities, like certain episodes of Fear the Walking Dead, include more references to bathing and cleanliness. The ones focused on survival in harsh conditions, like Dead City's urban wasteland, barely mention it at all. But here's what I really think the showrunners are doing with this pattern. They're using hygiene decline to show hope erosion. The longer the apocalypse goes on, the less people care about staying clean, because caring requires energy and emotional investment they can no longer afford. It's not that they've forgotten what cleanliness feels like. It's not that they wouldn't enjoy a hot shower if one magically appeared. It's that they've accepted a world where it doesn't matter anymore. And that acceptance? That's one of the most devastating losses in the entire series. Not the loss of safety. They never really had that. Not the loss of communities keep forming and reforming despite everything. Not even the loss of loved ones, though that's crushing every single time. But the loss of the belief that small dignities are worth maintaining. The loss of the idea that how you present yourself matters. The loss of hope that things could ever be different. The moment you stop caring about whether you're clean is the moment you fully accepted that the old world is gone and it's never coming back. You're not preserving anything anymore. You're not maintaining standards or holding on to humanity or believing in a future where these things matter. You're just surviving day to day, and everything else has fallen away. Think about early Rick versus late Rick. Early Rick believed in rebuilding. He believed communities could be safe, that they could grow food and raise children and create something like the world before. He made that possible at the prison at Alexandria. But by season 9, by the time he disappears, he's been ground down so far that belief is barely there anymore. He's going through the motions of leadership because someone has to, but the hope that drove him initially, that's mostly gone. And you can see it in how he looks, how he carries himself, how he stopped caring about anything except keeping people alive one more day. So here's my question for you, the one I want you to really sit with. Would you waste water on a shower during a siege? Not a hypothetical siege, a real one, where walkers are pressing against your walls and hostile communities are surrounding you and every drop of water might be needed for drinking tomorrow. Would you use precious resources on something as seemingly frivolous as hygiene, when those same resources might be the difference between life and death? It's easy to say, of course I would, when you're comfortable and safe, reading this late at night in bed. But in the moment, when survival is genuinely uncertain, when the water you use to wash is water someone else can't drink, I think a lot of us would make the same choice the characters made. We'd let it go. We'd decide that being clean isn't worth what it costs. And we'd be right in that moment, even as we lose something essential about ourselves. Let me take you back to Herschel's farm in season 2. Morning routines, breakfast together at the farmhouse table. Basic structure to the days, someone always on watch, but also someone always tending the garden, checking the animals, maintaining the property. Herschel believed in maintaining those patterns because he understood something fundamental. Routines keep you human. They give you a reason to get up in the morning beyond just, I'm not dead yet. They provide structure when the world has lost all structure. They remind you that life means more than just survival. And part of those routines included basic hygiene, washing up at the pump outside, keeping the farm clean, maintaining the house even though walkers were in the barn, small acts of normalcy in an abnormal world. Herschel had lost his wife to suicide after the outbreak began. He had shot walkers to protect his daughters. He knew what the world had become, but he refused to let that world define how he lived. There's this scene in Season 2, Episode 5, Chupacabra, where Herschel tells Rick that his group can stay until they're back on their feet, but they need to follow the rules, respect the property, help with chores, maintain the routines that make the farm feel like home rather than just another survival camp. He's not being rigid or unreasonable. He's protecting the last piece of civilization he has left. The routines are what separate the farm from the chaos outside. The farm fell. Everyone remembers that. Season 2, Episode 13, Beside the Dying Fire. The walkers came, drawn by the gunshot that killed Shane. The barn burned. They scattered into the night, separated, believing people were dead who weren't. But what's easy to miss in the chaos and tragedy is what they lost beyond just the physical location. They lost the routines. They lost the structure. They lost the luxury of thinking beyond immediate survival. And with it went any pretense of maintaining hygiene standards. They spent that whole summer on the road between season 2 and 3, living out of cars, scavenging, barely surviving. Lori was pregnant and exhausted. Carl was injured and traumatized. The group was fractured and desperate. There was no time for routines, no space for maintaining appearances. They were in pure survival mode. Then came the prison in seasons 3 and 4. And for a while, they rebuilt those routines. They had time to establish systems again, to think about things like clean water from the well and waste management and where people would sleep. Rick tried to create farming plots like Herschel had. They organized council meetings. They took in new people from Woodbury. For a while, it looked like they might actually build something lasting. But then the prison fell too. Season 4, mid-season. The governor attacked with a tank, destroyed the fences, filled the prison with walkers and gunfire and death. They scattered again. And this time, when they came back together at Terminus and then later at Alexandria, something was different. They were harder, more pragmatic, less willing to invest emotional energy in things that could be taken away at any moment. By the time the Commonwealth comes around in season 11, routines have been weaponized. The upper class maintains elaborate social schedules, parties at Pamela Milton's mansion, performances at the Opera House, structured days with jobs and meetings and all the trappings of pre-apocalypse society. Meanwhile, the working class grinds through repetitive labor, same shifts every day, same back-breaking work. Routines still exist, but they're no longer about maintaining humanity. They're about maintaining control. The people at the top use their ability to maintain civilized routines as proof of their superiority. Look, they seem to say, we still have culture, we still have society, we still have dinner parties and wine tastings and theatrical performances. We're not like those dirty survivors outside our walls. But those routines are built on the labor of people who don't have time for culture, who work too hard to think about anything except getting through the day. The people at the bottom endure routines designed to keep them compliant. Wake up, work your shift, go home exhausted, repeat. No time to organize or question or resist. The routine becomes a cage rather than a structure. It's the same tool, daily rhythms, expected patterns used for completely opposite purposes. This is the pattern that emerges when you track routines across the show. Every major location fall equals a hygiene system collapse. The farm had wells and routines. The farm fell, the routines died. The prison had infrastructure and schedules. The prison fell. The systems broke. Even Alexandria, with all its advantages and infrastructure, couldn't maintain those standards indefinitely once Negan and the Saviors showed up demanding tribute. Because in the Walking Dead universe, nothing lasts. No community is permanent. No system survives contact with reality for long. And the survivors have learned, through brutal experience, that investing too much in any system, including hygiene systems, including routines, including the structures that make life feel normal, is setting yourself up for loss. Every time they've built something, it's been destroyed. Every time they've established routines, those routines have been shattered by violence or walkers or internal collapse. After enough repetitions, you learn to stop investing. You learn to hold everything loosely because holding tight just makes it hurt more when it's ripped away. The real cost of staying human isn't just about washing or maintaining appearance. It's about whether you're willing to care about washing when you know everything you build will eventually fall. It's about whether you have the emotional resilience to maintain dignity and routines and small acts of civilization when experience has taught you that it's all temporary. When you know that the well you're maintaining today will be abandoned tomorrow, when you understand that the shower you're taking this morning might be the last one for months or years. And I think the answer for most of these characters has become no. They've learned to survive without it. They've accepted that staying clean is a luxury they can't afford, not just in terms of resources or time, but in terms of emotional investment. Caring hurts. Hope hurts. Routines hurt when they're destroyed. So they stop doing both. They survive without caring, without hoping, without investing. And something essential dies in the process. Let's look at what this theory means for character arcs going forward. Because if hygiene is really a marker for hope, dignity, and connection to the old world, then watching who maintains it and who doesn't tells us something important about where they're headed, psychologically and narratively. Rick's beard became iconic, right? It's part of how we remember him in the later seasons. But it wasn't always there. It grew as his burden grew, as the weight of leadership and loss accumulated season after season. Every impossible decision, every person he couldn't save, every community that fell despite his best efforts, it accumulated in that beard, like a physical manifestation of trauma. In Season 1 and early Season 2, he was clean-shaven. Sheriff's Deputy Rick, trying to find his family and protect the group. By Season 3, stubble appeared. Season 4, the beard started growing. By Season 7, after Negan killed Glenn and Abraham, after Rick was broken and humiliated and forced to submit, the beard was thick and wild, and it stayed that way until he disappeared in Season 9. That transformation wasn't just about facial hair. It was about what survival had cost him. The clean-shaven sheriff who believed in justice and law and protecting the innocent, gone. Replaced by a man who's killed more people than he can count, who's made decisions that haunt him, who's learned that sometimes the only way to protect people is through violence and brutality. The beard marked that transformation visibly. Maggie's appearance shifts tell a similar story. Before Glenn's death, even after everything they'd been through, she maintained a certain softness. Not in terms of capability, she was always tough, always capable of defending herself, but in terms of how she presented herself to the world. After Glenn's brutal murder in Season 7, after she had to watch him die and couldn't do anything to stop it, her whole demeanor changed, harder, more guarded, less willing to show vulnerability. And her appearance reflected that. Less attention to anything cosmetic, more focus on just getting through each day. Her hair pulled back functionally rather than styled. Clothes chosen for practicality rather than appearance. Every change in her appearance marks a trauma point, a moment where she had to become someone different to survive. The soft person who believed in community and trust, buried under the weight of loss and the necessity of vengeance. And then there's Carol. Her transformations are legendary at this point. She's been so many different people. Abused housewife in Season 1, learning to survive at the quarry camp, protective mother at the farm, emerging warrior at the prison, hardened survivor after the prison fell, fake housewife in Alexandria, using appearance as camouflage, genuine kingdom resident with Ezekiel, isolated loner seeking peace, vengeful warrior against the whisperers. And every single transformation included a complete appearance change. She understands, maybe better than anyone in the show, that how you look is a tool. It can be camouflage when you need to seem harmless. It can be intimidation when you need people to fear you. It can be reassurance when you need to be trusted. Appearance, including cleanliness and grooming, is whatever you need it to be in any given moment. But underneath all those transformations is the same question: who is she really? And does it matter when survival requires becoming whoever the moment demands? Here's my prediction for future spin-offs and seasons. Hygiene will continue to mark safe periods versus crisis periods. When characters have access to showers, clean clothes, basic sanitation, we'll know they've found temporary safety. The narrative will slow down. There will be time for character development, relationship building, community establishment. When those things disappear, when characters are suddenly dirty and worn and barely hanging on, we'll know danger is coming or already here. It's become a visual language the show uses to communicate without words. We're already seeing this in the spin-offs. Daryl Dixon in France starts with him washing up after reaching the coast, finding temporary safety with the nuns. That clean moment marks a transition from pure survival to having enough safety to think about next steps. Dead City shows Maggie and Negan both road-worn and filthy, which tells us immediately that they're in crisis mode even before the plot kicks in. But there's an alternative reading here too, and it's worth considering, because I think both interpretations have validity. Maybe dirt isn't a sign of giving up. Maybe it's an earned survival badge, a mark of authenticity. The people covered in grime are the ones who've been out there fighting, doing what needs to be done. They're the ones taking risks, making hard choices, getting their hands dirty, literally and figuratively. The clean ones? In this reading, maybe they're the soft ones, the privileged ones who've been protected by walls and guards and systems that other people maintain. The ones who haven't had to make the hard choices. Look at the Commonwealth's upper class. They're clean because they're insulated from reality. They're clean because other people do the dirty work for them. Is that something to aspire to? Or is it a mark of disconnect from what survival really requires? I don't think the show comes down definitively on either side. I think it acknowledges both truths simultaneously. Cleanliness can be a sign of hope and humanity, a refusal to let the apocalypse take everything. Or it can be a mark of privilege and disconnect, a sign that you're not really doing the work of survival. Dirt can be a sign of despair and erosion, a marker of giving up on dignity. Or it can be proof of survival and authenticity, evidence that you're willing to do whatever it takes. Context matters. Who's clean, why they're clean, what it costs to stay that way, all of that determines what it means. A person who's clean because they maintain a well and choose to wash despite the difficulty? That's admirable. That's hope. A person who's clean because servants bring them hot water while others go without? That's privilege. That's disconnection. A person who's dirty because they're exhausted and broken and don't have the energy to care anymore? That's tragedy. A person who's dirty because they're out there fighting and surviving and doing what needs to be done? That's heroism. What matters is the choice. Are you maintaining hygiene because you believe the world can be rebuilt? Because you think civilization is worth preserving? Because you refuse to let the apocalypse take your humanity? Or are you letting it go because you've accepted that it can't be rebuilt, that civilization is gone, that humanity itself might be a luxury you can't afford? That choice tells us everything about where a character is headed and what they believe about the future. Let's talk about the production side for a minute, because I think understanding the behind-the-scenes reality helps us appreciate what the show is doing narratively. The Walking Dead ran for 11 seasons on AMC, from 2010 to 2022, with multiple spin-offs continuing the universe. And throughout all of that, bathroom, and washing scenes have been incredibly rare. You can probably count on two hands the number of times we've actually seen characters bathing or dealing with hygiene in any explicit way. That's not an accident or oversight. That's a deliberate choice made by the showrunners, the writers, the directors, and the production team. From a practical standpoint, showing people bathe doesn't move the story forward most of the time. It's screen time that could be spent on character development, plot advancement, Walker encounters, or the interpersonal conflicts that drive the drama. You've got roughly 45 minutes per episode minus commercials to tell a complete story. Why spend 3 or 4 of those minutes showing someone in the shower unless it serves a larger narrative purpose? And when they do show those scenes like Rick in Alexandria Season 5, like certain character moments scattered across the seasons, it's always meaningful. It's never just, look, they're washing. Rick's shower scene in Remember is about PTSD, about the disconnect between safety and trauma, about not being able to let go of hypervigilance, even in a moment of comfort. That's efficient storytelling. Every scene earns its place by serving character or plot or theme. But there is also a narrative choice embedded in this minimalist approach. By making hygiene invisible, they've normalized the apocalypse. They're not constantly reminding us that these people probably smell terrible, that they're wearing the same clothes for weeks, that basic sanitation is a constant challenge. Instead, they let us focus on the survival, the relationships, the moral questions. The hygiene stuff happens off screen, if it happens at all, and we're meant to understand that it's there but not important to the story being told. This is actually really smart from a viewer engagement perspective. If they spend time every episode showing characters dealing with dirty clothes or lack of soap or toilet situations, it would bog down the narrative. It would remind us constantly of the mundane difficulties of apocalypse survival in ways that would make the show less enjoyable to watch. By keeping that stuff invisible, they keep us focused on the dramatic elements, the Walker threats, the human conflicts, the emotional arcs. Behind the scenes, actors have occasionally mentioned in interviews the challenges of maintaining continuity with dirt and makeup. Andrew Lincoln talked about the specific makeup process for Rick's look in different seasons. Norman Reedus has joked about his character's perpetually greasy hair. Getting the same level of grime day after day of shooting requires careful work from the makeup department. Too clean, and it breaks immersion for viewers who are tracking these details. Too dirty, and it becomes distracting, pulling focus from the performances and story. There's a sweet spot they're aiming for, where the characters look appropriately worn and road dirty without looking like they're in a Halloween costume. That sweet spot has shifted over the seasons. Early seasons, characters looked relatively cleaner because narratively they were still close to the outbreak, still trying to maintain standards. Later seasons, the baseline level of grime increased because narratively they're years into the apocalypse and survival has worn them down. The makeup and costume departments deserve real credit for maintaining this continuity. They track what each character was wearing in previous episodes, how dirty they should be based on what they've been through, whether they've had access to clean clothes or washing opportunities. It's meticulous work that most viewers don't consciously notice, but would definitely notice if it was wrong. And the community, the fans, the theorists, the people who watch this show obsessively, we've noticed. There are entire forum threads on Reddit and fan sites discussing continuity errors, debating whether someone's hair should be that clean given the timeline, analyzing background details for evidence of water systems and infrastructure. People freeze-frame episodes looking for wells or rain barrels or evidence of laundry being done. It's become part of the meta conversation around the show. The counterpoint that always comes up in these discussions is simple and probably true. Maybe they bathe off-screen. Maybe we just don't see it because it's not relevant to the plot. The show doesn't show us everything that happens in these people's lives. We don't see them using the bathroom unless it's plot relevant. We don't see them eating every meal. We see the dramatic moments, the conflicts, the turning points. The mundane stuff, including washing, probably happens in the gaps between scenes, in the time jumps between episodes. That's entirely reasonable from a storytelling perspective. The show trusts us to understand that basic human functions are happening without needing to show them. We don't need to see someone brush their teeth to know that oral hygiene is probably something they attempt when possible. We don't need to see laundry being done to understand that people occasionally wash their clothes when they have the opportunity. But here's what I think the showrunner's hygiene philosophy really comes down to. They trust us to fill in the blanks. They don't need to show us every aspect of survival because we're smart enough to understand that it's happening or that it's not happening and characters are dealing with the consequences. And by keeping hygiene mostly invisible, they keep the focus where they want it, on the human stories, the impossible choices, the question of what it means to stay human when the world has fallen apart. The AMC production realities matter too. Budget affects everything. Water effects are expensive. Showing functional showers requires plumbing setups and water systems that take time and money to create. Showing people bathing in streams or rivers requires location shooting and safety considerations. It's often simpler and more cost-effective to suggest these things happen off-screen than to actually show them. The narrative choice to make hygiene largely invisible is supported by practical production considerations. And the result is a show that feels grounded and realistic in its survival elements, without getting bogged down in the mundane details that would slow the story. It's a balance between realism and entertainment, between accuracy and engagement. And mostly, across 11 seasons and multiple spin-offs, they've managed to strike that balance effectively. The hygiene invisibility isn't a flaw or oversight. It's a feature. It's part of how the show communicates that we're years into an apocalypse where the old standards don't apply, where survival has become normalized, where the daily struggles of staying alive have replaced the daily routines of staying clean. So we come back to where we started. Rick Grimes in a hospital bathroom, reaching for a faucet that won't run. That moment, in Season 1, Episode 1, Days Gone By, is the first time we see what the apocalypse means in practical terms. Not walkers, not death, not violence, just the absence of clean water. The simplest, most basic thing we all took for granted every single day, gone. Turn the tap, nothing comes out. That's when you know the world has fundamentally changed. And now, over a decade later in the show's timeline, across multiple series and spin-offs spanning The Walking Dead, Fear the Walking Dead, World Beyond, Dead City, Daryl Dixon, and whatever comes next, that scarcity has become normalized. Clean water transformed from something assumed to something precious. A hot shower went from a daily routine to a luxury some people will never experience again. The act of washing became a marker of class, power, privilege, and hope. But here's the thing I keep thinking about. The psychological impact of losing hygiene isn't something the show dwells on explicitly, but it's massive when you really consider it. Humans are social animals. We evolved to care about cleanliness, about appearance, about how we present ourselves to our communities. It's tied to self-worth, to dignity, to our sense of ourselves as people rather than just surviving animals. And when that's stripped away, not by choice, but by circumstances beyond control, it changes something fundamental about how we see ourselves. Some of the characters have held on to it as much as possible. They find ways to wash, to maintain some basic standard of cleanliness, because it matters to them on a deep level. It's their way of saying, I'm still me. The apocalypse hasn't taken everything. I'm still the person I was before, or at least I'm trying to be. For them, staying clean is an act of resistance, a refusal to let the world dictate who they are. Others have let it go, pragmatically or emotionally or both. For them, survival means accepting that the old standards don't apply anymore. Water is for drinking, not washing. Time is for defense and food gathering, not grooming. Energy is finite and precious, and wasting it on appearance seems absurd when every day might be your last. Neither approach is wrong. They're just different responses to impossible circumstances. The theory I've been building here across these chapters is this. Hygiene in the Walking Dead universe isn't about being clean or dirty. It's about what you're willing to fight for when everything else has been taken away. It's about whether you believe the world can be rebuilt or whether you've accepted that this is all there is now. It's about hope versus pragmatism, humanity versus survival, the person you were versus the person circumstances are forcing you to become. And that transformation from Rick at a functioning hospital sink to survivors rationing rainwater years into the apocalypse, that's the real story of The Walking Dead. Not the walkers, though they're the catalyst and constant threat. Not the villain communities, though they provide conflict and drama. Not even the action sequences and survival scenarios that fill the episodes. The real story is the slow erosion of all the small things that made us human, and the question of which ones are worth fighting to preserve. Think about everything that's been lost. The belief that help is coming. The assumption that there are authorities somewhere maintaining order. The faith that medical care is available if you get sick. The expectation of regular meals and safe shelter. And yes, the simple daily routine of washing yourself, putting on clean clothes, presenting yourself to the world as a clean, groomed person. Each of those losses represents something deeper. When you accept that help isn't coming, you're accepting that you're alone. When you accept that there are no authorities, you're accepting that might makes right. When you accept that medical care is gone, you're accepting that injury or illness means death. When you accept that regular meals aren't guaranteed, you're accepting constant hunger as normal. And when you accept that cleanliness doesn't matter, you're accepting that the standards of civilization are gone. Some characters fight those acceptances. They maintain hope, build communities, try to preserve what was lost. Others embrace them, deciding that accepting reality is healthier than clinging to false hope. Most fall somewhere in between, oscillating based on circumstances and their own psychological state. So here's my final question, the one I want you to sit with after we finish here. What small comfort would you refuse to abandon? If the world fell apart tomorrow, if clean water became scarce and danger was constant and every day was a fight to survive, what's the one piece of your old life you'd hold on to? What would you refuse to let the apocalypse take from you? Maybe it's washing. Maybe it's maintaining some basic level of cleanliness, even when it's difficult, even when it costs resources, even when it seems impractical. Maybe it's something else entirely. Books, music, cooking actual meals instead of just eating whatever's available, maintaining relationships beyond pure survival utility. But whatever it is, that thing you'd fight for even when it's impractical and costly and arguably foolish, that's what keeps you human. That's what makes survival worth it. That's the line you refuse to cross. And that's the quiet truth hiding beneath this whole strange, sad question about whether anyone ever showered in The Walking Dead. The answer is yes, sometimes, when they could, when they had the resources and safety and energy to care, but less often as time goes on, less often as hope erodes and survival becomes everything. The transformation isn't about hygiene. Hygiene is just a visible marker of something deeper, the slow change from people trying to maintain civilization to people just trying to make it through another day. From believing the world can be rebuilt to accepting that maybe it can't. From holding on to who you were to becoming whoever you need to be to survive. And in that transformation, something essential is lost. Maybe not gone entirely, not erased completely, but diminished. Worn away by time and trauma, and the relentless grinding weight of survival in a world that's trying to kill you every single moment. The question isn't whether they shower. The question is, what does it mean when they stop trying? And what would it take for them to start trying again? There's an image I keep coming back to. A rain barrel sitting empty under a sunrise, waiting for water that may or may not come. It's such a simple thing, a practical object in a world where every drop matters, but it also feels like a promise, like hope made physical, because that barrel is there for a reason. Someone placed it, maintained it, checked it regularly. Someone believed that rain would fall again, and that when it did, they'd be ready to catch it. Maybe survival in The Walking Dead was always about that kind of quiet faith. Not the faith that things would go back to the way they were, but the faith that small dignities were worth preserving. That catching rainwater for washing mattered, even when everything else was falling apart. Maybe the real question wasn't, did anyone ever shower? But what did it mean when they tried? And maybe, just maybe, survival meant choosing which parts of yourself to keep clean, not your skin, necessarily, but your conscience, your compassion, your belief that the person you were before still matters somehow. The water will come again, or it won't, but the barrel stays where it is, waiting, just in case.